This is ACA'S premier event, and one that it's a big deal to me. I always enjoy this, and we've been finding out in the last couple of years that people were actually coming from out of town, some distance sometime, to see this. So we wanted to make it a little bit longer day, add an extra event. So Matt has great.
This is the best we could come up with.
Matt has given this talk around the country, and I was trying to rope him into an ACA lecture, but this opportunity came up, so I think this is much better. Sorry about the temperature. I know it's a little warmer than y'all are used to. Also, let me explain a little bit about the set. The people that were in here before it's a theater group, and they're doing a production that takes place in a monastery. So that's why you have the set with the religious symbols and stuff like that. They're not making fun of us.
It is a church.
Yeah, it is a church, but they don't really go into it for a whole lot of the religious symbols. So.
Yeah, but there were some people who asked, and for those who aren't aware, Unitarian Universalist churches are where a lot of atheists and agnostics and free thinkers spend their Sundays. Don't ask me why. Actually, I don't. It's because we're social animals who appreciate that, enjoy it. If we didn't have something similar, yeah.
I was just curious if other people besides me are warm, why don't we turn on the ceiling fans?
Yeah, I tried to pull them. It didn't come on. I don't know if there's a switch somewhere, but if Don, if you want to investigate fan switches,
I will. Sure will.
So is everybody here for the back cruise too? Mm-hmm. Awesome. You don't have to explain. We're done.
All right.
I'm preaching to the choir today for sure, everyone. It's 3:15. This will not go on terribly long because I've done it several times, and I don't think that I'll get the same questions from some of you that I've gotten from other places that I've been. And we need to be down in the town by 5:30, and I realized this week that we scheduled the back cruise at the beginning of the Con Street Festival and on a UT game day. So we're going to need to get on. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it, and hopefully we've added a little something to this. I gave this first at Washington State University and at Bradley and at an atheist group in Nashville, North Carolina. What's that? Oh. All right. Every group recorded it, and every group was going to post it, and nobody did. So, of course, I mentioned it on the show thinking it was going to be posted, and everybody's like, where is it? Where is it? So we're doing it again. We're recording it. Some of this is going to seem very obvious. Some of it may seem a little overly pedantic. And I suspect that, like I said, I'm preaching most of the choir today. But after giving this talk a few times, I found there's a few things that needed to be included because of questions I was asked after the lecture was over. And so please don't think that I'm overstating the obvious for you. It's in part because we're recording it. I kid you not, after this was over, and this will be funnier to you at the end, but after I finished this lecture, the very first question I got was from a young woman in the back who said, I understand what you said, but where do atheists get their morals from? And I was like, what on earth? I just was dumbfounded. It proved to be a very important point that I'll touch on at the end. If we have. So 10 years ago, I was a fundamentalist Christian. I was convinced that the Christian Bible was the inspired word of the living God, and that the moral values and views that it contained were correct, immutable, and beyond question. My understanding of the views of the secular community was limited, to put it mildly. I can remember only 2 occasions growing up when these subjects ever even arose. The first happened when I was pretty young. I was looking through the channels one afternoon, and I came across an episode of Dillahunty's show, and there was a woman on there who said something negative about Christianity, and I was a kid, I had no idea, and I just started watching it because it piqued my curiosity. And my mom came in and told me to turn it off, that the woman in question was an evil atheist who was bent on destroying God's country and stealing away our right to pray. I'm not exactly sure what she said, but the impression that was left with me was that this was an evil, God-hating, anti-everything person who was bent on destruction. 5 years later, I finally understood that the woman in question was, of course, Madeleine Mary O'Hara. irony in me being here in Austin, where American Atheist was originally set up. The second memory is a little less clear. I remember hearing the phrase secular humanist, probably on an episode of the 700 Club. During the day, my mom would have the 700 Club on television, and I would be doing something else in the living room, not paying a great deal of attention to it. So I was, I guess, subconsciously being fed religious ideas that I wasn't aware of. But I heard the phrase, and I heard what they were talking about, and they seemed to be kind of passionate about this secular humanist thing. And so I asked my mom what it was, and she pretty much replied that it was code for evil atheists, like we talked about before. That was it. For many years, that's all I knew about the secular perspective, and I was pretty sure that's all I needed to know. These weren't just lost souls in need of salvation. They were vile apostates who directly opposed God's moral law, and God had given them over to reprobate minds and all the other verses that we know about. They weren't beyond salvation, because nobody was, but they were working for Satan, even though they didn't realize it. I don't want to waste a whole bunch of time talking about my journey from fundamentalist Christian, intent on heeding the call to the ministry, to outspoken atheist apostate who destroys everything that people believe in, because I've talked about it before, and most of you are probably familiar with it. But it's important for those who don't know me, who might be watching this, to understand that I was once of a very different mindset than I am today. So I'm going to talk a little about the superiority of secular morality. I didn't have to look at that to remind myself what I was talking about. One of the most commonly addressed subjects, I get it all the time in email, it comes up all the time in the show, I see it in message boards, and not just directed at me, like answer this question, but we get email from people who watch the show who say, oh, I got into this debate and now I'm stuck and I don't know what to do. Can you please help me out? And that's why I don't have any hair anymore. But we're going to go ahead and tackle this issue as best we can today. A grand lie has been spread. It's a lie that I used to believe. It's a lie that I hear and read on a nearly weekly basis. It's a lie that muddles the subject of morality and preys on our intellectual laziness and fears. That lie begins by trying to claim that you can't have morals without some external authority. And then, if you manage to push the subject, they'll capitulate that you can, in fact, have some moral sense without that external authority, but that they're inferior. That admission, I think, destroys their first claim outright and hardly needs to be addressed any further. But this claim that secular morality is inferior, both in its principles and in its methods, is what we're going to address mostly today. Secular morals are superior in almost every demonstrable way. And hopefully, this is something that everybody would eventually agree with, based on what we're going to talk about today. So why are secular moral systems superior? Because I said so. You guys enjoy your back cruise? Have fun. That answer, because I said so, is not very satisfying. I think we all figured that out when we were really little. And there's a reason why it's not very satisfying, and it's because when we ask a question, we're looking for an actual answer, we're looking for an explanation, we're looking for something that increases our understanding of the subject. And because I said so, it doesn't do that at all. It's a roadblock. The fact that the response isn't satisfying doesn't mean it's not true, though. If the reason we're disappointed is that this isn't an explanation, and we want explanations, we crave explanations. So, saying that secular morality is superior because I said so, not going to be satisfying. But we'll actually get back to that a little later. When we're assessing an action, and I do believe that this applies only to actions, the thought police can come pull me on the side afterwards. But the determination of whether something is moral or immoral is based on evaluating an action with respect to some standard or value. Positive evaluations end up labeled morally good, morally right, and negative evaluations are labeled as evil or wrong. Morally neutral assessments may be truly neutral, or simply so complex or subjective that a clear evaluation may not be possible. It makes no difference, though, whether the standard by which you measure is ultimately the source of a subjective opinion or an objective truth. Once you have the standard, the assessment with respect to that standard becomes objective. There's a lot of bickering about the objective morality versus subjective morality, moral relativism, and moral absolutes. And I probably won't get into too much of that today. The point is that if you can agree on a standard, you can make an objective assessment. The standard itself may be subjective ultimately. We can assess any action with respect to any standard or value. And consider chess for a moment. It's a game with rules, and those rules might have been the result of careful thought, it could have been the result of playtesting, years of evolving gameplay, or they could have been just arbitrarily thought up with. Here's the rules, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to play it. But, irrespective of how those rules came about, we can assess each player's moves with respect to those rules. The rules of chess aren't directly analogous to morals. They're rigid, they're externally imposed, but the creation of the game is somewhat analogous. And the strategy that one uses to play the game is what we're really talking about when we talk about moral systems. Would it be fair to say that the strategy one uses in chess is subjective? Sure. But as long as the goal is to win the game, or to avoid losing at a minimum, we're able to evaluate the strategy, which is subjective and individualized, with respect to that goal of winning the game. It would be dishonest to imply that because different people have different strategies that we are, as a collective, somehow unable to say anything about which strategy is superior. We judge a strategy by its results, comparing its results to the goal. We can identify actions that are better or worse, even if we're unable to identify absolutes or clearly define the best move. In a game of chess, there are a number of options, and some are clearly better than others, just as we can identify that, generally speaking, if our goal is to make friends with somebody, it's probably, you're more likely to succeed by offering them a gift than you are by stealing their car. Those are extremes, and we can easily identify the extremes. Everybody can do it. It's trivial. It's one of the reasons why the subject of morality is so muddied, because there are things that are patently obvious to everybody, yet nobody understands why. Or almost nobody understands why. Or maybe we're not even sure who understands why. We can argue about it. But we can identify those extremes, and people who are uncomfortable with the things in between the extremes, the spectrum of possible actions that we take. Some people want to appeal to external authorities, and those external authorities tend to oversimplify the options. There's a broad range of possibilities between offering a gift and stealing somebody's car, and the test of the strategy is in determining how accurately and efficiently it assists you in placing actions within that spectrum. How does your system of morality, how effective is it at figuring out how good something is or how bad something is? It's, what process goes through the comparison to determine those goals, or how results meet those goals. One advantage of secular morality is that we can assess any strategy on its own merits, and we can use those obvious extremes as a guideline to help filter the scenarios that are less obvious. It's much the same way we do in science and disciplines where we have this amassed human knowledge. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. We can benefit from the wisdom of the people who came before us. Similarly, we can compare extremes. We do it all the time. Well, this isn't bad, but could it be bad or could it be worse? We have slippery slope arguments where, well, if you legalize marijuana, next you'll have to legalize crack. No, you don't. That's absurd. Well, why do they go to that every time? It's because it's obvious to everybody, or almost everybody, that legalizing crack is probably a really bad thing. And they're using it to misrepresent, in this oversimplification that I was talking about, the legalization of marijuana, which, by the way, I'm in favor of and I don't smoke. Was there something there I missed? Oh, it did. So I'd like to address some of the aspects of moral strategy by contrasting secular moral systems with, see, that's how slow I have to focus on this. By contrasting secular moral systems with non-secular moral systems, by considering what is the origin of the core values and goals in each system, whose interests are served, how does each system handle the issues of justification and authority, what does each system address, the need for modifications to the values and the goals, what process does each use for resolving conflicts about values, and how robust or flexible is each system. You guys are going to quickly sense trend, probably by the next slide.